The University of Kentucky Nursery Landscape Integrated Pest Management interviews, podcasts, are sponsored by a grant from Kentucky Integrated Pest Management. The interviews cover plant production, pests, and shared information from industry and academic leaders. This edition is an interview with Dr. John Lea-Cox, University of Maryland professor in the Plant Science and Landscape Architecture Department. From the university website, he states, "My expertise is primarily in the areas of water and nutrient management to reduce the environmental impacts of production practices. However, my interests are very broad and include general plant physiology, plant-water relations, soilless substrates, nutrient modeling, production system dynamics, and wireless sensor networks." John and his colleagues are constantly striving for better extension and research programming. Therefore, our conversation strayed from the planned water management to nursery crop extension, and unfortunately was cut short by the use of a phone to record this particular podcast. I will invite John back for a future update on his nursery crop and extension and research projects. We're here with John Lea-Cox. He's a professor of horticulture, I assume. Is that correct, John?
That is, yes.
At the University of Maryland. We're at the Mant Show and for the nursery industry, and John works a lot with water and other environmental activities that are related to agriculture, horticulture, and specifically with nursery crop production. John, why don't you just give me a little background on your position, what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Wayne. Well, I've been at the University of Maryland for about 22 years now. Did my PhD at the University of Florida. As you can probably tell, I'm not exactly a native, but I am a southerner. I come from the deep south. I'm South Africa originally, actually born in Zimbabwe, and went to college in South Africa, did my undergrad and master's in South Africa, and had the great opportunity to do my PhD at the University of Florida back in the early 90s. And then I came to Florida via a few interesting places, which we can talk more about.
Okay, well, I guess the aspect that I was interested in from a plant protection and also mostly from an environmental impact is how you started with the Chesapeake Initiative or whatever it might have been called at the time, and nurseries in relationship to that, and some of the activities that you had that hopefully led to some changes. And
yeah, it's been quite a path. A little prehistory is because when I was in South Africa, actually between degrees, I actually went out and worked as a citrus nursery manager for the citrus industry in near Port Elizabeth. Got kind of farming out of my system, went back to college, but I've always been interested in, really my forte has been nutrient management from my early days, but I was in citrus. When I came to Florida, I had the great opportunity to work with Jim Seivertson at the Lake Alfred Research Station, and I worked on nitrogen movement to groundwater. It was very much associated with citrus at that point, and of course Florida has very sandy soils, so did some interesting work with isotopes and natural isotopes in 15. So that kind of led to an opportunity to actually do a postdoc at Kennedy Space Center with the Controlled Environment Life Support System, the Advanced Life Support System as they call it. And Ray Wheeler was my mentor there, and that was interesting because that was and that was kind of mid-80s manned mission to Mars, and they were literally putting people, microbes and plants in a tin can and sending them off to Mars. But of course the launch capability was very much about water. They didn't know water that existed on Mars at that point, and getting enough water to sustain life at that point was the point of the project, and it was a very successful. We learned an incredible amount of stuff, but it was systems. And that's what got me into systems work. And so I think that's probably why they hired me at Maryland. I had the opportunity to perhaps continue on that path at NASA, but I wanted to, I was intrigued by getting back into the natural world, and the job came up at Maryland for a nursery extension specialist. Of course, Chesapeake Bay has been the driver and still is the driver for a lot of Maryland's economy. And of course, it's a small but incredibly diverse state in terms of small farms in particular. It has a very healthy nursery and greenhouse industry. So that's why and at that point, the legislation was it was fairly obvious that they were heading towards regulation of nutrients and nutrient inputs into the bay. So I think that's why they probably took a chance on me.
Well, great. From that aspect, then you took the position and probably worked with substrates and nutrients and water control, and then at some point there was regulation related to the Chesapeake?
Well, it was interesting because literally about the year after I arrived in Maryland in 96, the legislation was passed. But of course, legislation is one thing. It takes an enormous amount of time to actually develop regulations that actually make the legislation work. And that was an interesting process because that was a collaborative effort between the extension, research and extension part of the University of Maryland as well as the Maryland Department of Agriculture. And nurseries, it's kind of an interesting story because nurseries are difficult in that we don't have yield. It's not like a corn farm or a wheat or soybean farm. It's not like we have pounds of corn at the end of the season that we can measure and it's fairly predictable. So, that's how nutrient management plans were actually being written. Unfortunately, for the nursery industry, we didn't have yield. It's not like we had numbers of plants. Mm-hmm. But we also didn't have the knowledge on how much those plants took up on any one given year. And you can do the math on that. But the thing is, we had 400 or 500 different species of plants. And we didn't have enough time in the world to actually figure out exactly what was going on with all those products. Right. And so we had kind of imperative to kind of take a different approach. And that's why I don't know if you remember the pharmacist program way back when. Yeah. So I took a good look at the pharmacist program and I thought, this is interesting because what they're doing is they're working on systems. So it became much more logical for us to actually take a systems approach where we looked at the whole farm. We looked at what they did in terms of water, nutrients, and how they applied it, and then measure the outcomes of that. So measure literally how much they applied, but also how much was running off and the integrated practices as well. So that was the genesis of our nutrient management program, which we eventually came out as part of the regulation.
Well, I know we've come a long way the last 20 years or so with the groups that you and I both belong to.
Absolutely.
The regional project, NC 1186, and then the activities of the Water 3 program. And the original program you had online back when, that's still there.
Yeah. Yeah, it was an early project, kind of a knowledge center.
Right.
We just literally tried to tap as many of the extension specialists all over the country and kind of put their knowledge kind of online so people could access it.
Yeah, that was I
still up and going 20 years later. It's amazing.
I remember becoming a member in order to log in, I think. But yeah, that was, truthfully, I feel like with the group that's around now, members of these different groups that cooperate on activities, research projects, that we've come a long, long ways, even at the university level, for people to be involved in doing this in a collaborative manner. And you've been a leader. So.
Well, but it always takes a team. It's one thing I've learned. You can work, you can chisel away at what you do, but if you're good at working with people and forming good collaborations, the synergy that you get out of those collaborations is huge. You achieve so much more than you ever would as an individual. And that's the beauty of it. And that's the beauty of these, but it's really nice working with people who are of a like mind. Sure. And I think part of that is because we also realize that we don't necessarily have all the answers. When you're in extension, it's a different realm to research. I mean, not to say that research is not absolutely valuable, but extending that knowledge to producers is really the game.
Sure.
And if you don't do that, you're never going to be successful. And so extension has always been about teamwork.
Yeah, right.
And it's not just, the county and regional folks. It's the graduate students and it's the undergraduate students. And that's what your program really is about as well.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, having young people come up, you get to I'm close to retirement, but you get to the point where you look at the young people and then you start looking to them for guidance.
Oh, all the time. In fact, I always really relish the opportunity to grow through advising graduate and undergraduate students. I think one of the smartest, I'm fortunate to count him as a friend, but I had right in my first greenhouse management class that I taught, I had this guy, he had this enormous beard. He'd sit at the back of the class and he'd rock on his chair. He'd kind of look at me through kind of half-lidded eyes. And I think, oh man, this guy's just asleep and he's just cruising, right? No. Every now and again, he'd just throw out the most penetrating question. And it's like, oh. And it's those guys that really listen. They keep you on your feet. And it was a salient lesson to me. It was just like, don't think that they're not paying attention because, they may be bored, but if you're lucky, they're paying attention, and they are the people who keep you on your toes.
Sure. I remember when I was a young person, just started out of graduate school, those kinds of people, I used to be, I just was semi-afraid of them. They'd ask a question, and I was too embarrassed to say I didn't know the answer.
Exactly. I'll get back to you on that. That's a really good point.
Try to come up with some way of dealing with that, because they... there's a lot of young people that are very, very intelligent and ask penetrating questions, as you pointed out.
And it translates to, our growers as well. I always really enjoyed the opportunity to work with growers, and I kind of half-hearting joke sort of in a way, in that I say that these guys, they really have a lot of tractor time.
Sure.
But they are thinkers, a lot of them, because they're very smart business. And, my current thinking is, and this is how I kind of steer my programs now, how I look at people is I'm looking at them in terms of risk management. They're managing risk, whether it be they're trying to optimize practices, not only just resources they're using, but the labor and timing. And so understanding what a grower is doing and how time limited they are really focuses you on providing information that is timely. And so, it's a truism, we're all on our phones at this point, but we can use that to our advantage, because if we can develop good quality, help deliver good quality information, we're then making that risk management decision so much easier.
And even within our ranks of academia, we're cooperating with the nursery and landscape industry.
Always.
Because they have questions that you haven't even anticipated would be a problem, and then we have a collaborative effort to deal with it. That part is another part that when you first start out, you're just kind of out there, and
it's kind of hard to when you're coming in as a graduate student, and it's difficult to place yourself, you've got this knowledge base, and you come out and you think, I'm going to save the world. But I think the truth is, and the reality is, we're never going to save the world, but if we get enough people moving in the right direction and all four wheels are turning at the same speed, we're going to get there faster than if we've got three wheels going and one wheel's stuck. And so, again, it's this collaborative effort. I always kind of joke that I really thought it would be really good to have done some psychology classes to understand human behavior and human nature, right?
Well, I didn't want to pass on this because this is somewhat about the environment and our future of not just you and me, but everyone. You presented a discussion about evaluating the impact of green space that you were talking about, and the ability to measure plants' activities related to CO2 and some of these other things that are currently critical to human existence. And at the same token, where you're looking at it on a fairly small scale, a small garden. Can you talk a little bit about some of that?
It's kind of interesting, because I think, again, you've got to think about value. Value is a very interesting word. It has umpteen meanings, of course. We have our own values. You value something. Something has a value. I think what's really interesting in this day and age is discriminating what has value. Not necessarily from a monetary sense, but from a use, maybe usefulness sense, but also, I think if we're really going to understand our place as a species on this planet, we have to start valuing ecosystems and the resilience that ecosystems bring to us. So Urban systems are very interesting to me because ultimately, currently, they say at about the moment, about more than 50% of the world's population lives in an urban area.